an important food, a healthy food, and a basic food that can be served in more than 100 different ways.
No magic and no miracles. It's against the rules.
Up and down the aisles the shopper goes, and what you buy, nobody knows.
Hello and welcome to the Fat for Weight Loss show. My name is Aaron and I am your host for today's episode. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, let me introduce myself. Firstly, I am from Australia, if you hadn't already guessed from the accent, and I run a ketogenic food blog called Fat for Weight Loss, found at fatforweightloss.com.au. And the aim of this podcast is to dig into the world of nutrition, fitness, and everything in between. I'm a nutritional therapist and an advanced sports exercise nutritional advisor. However, I am not a doctor, so I cannot give you any medical advice. This also applies to any guests involved in this show. Please make sure you consult your doctor before making any changes to your diet or medication. You can find me on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at Fat for Weight Loss for delicious keto recipes, meal plan videos, and drool-worthy food photography. So let's get right into it. My guest today is Dave Basile, aka AntiGravityGains, and he is a father, husband, and works as a software developer. He grew up in the US, but traveled around as his father was in the Air Force. His favorite place to live was Colorado, as well as Peru and Panama. Dave is what most people would call an ultra runner, running his first marathon in 2009 and later his first ultra marathon in 2015. An ultra marathon is basically anything over a marathon in length, which is 42 kilometers or 26 miles. Since then, he has run many races and he has been to many places, including the famous race out at Leadville, Colorado. His longest race to date is the Brew to Brew in Kansas City, which was 44 miles in length, a whopping 70 kilometers, in which he ran strict keto. Currently he lives in Kansas City, which gives him easy access to the trails, where he's discovered a love for single track running. He's also a big advocate of strength training, which he's used to recover from a bad injury in 2012, hitting the gym as part of his regular run training. In this podcast, we talk about training advice, some nutrition and hydration surrounding keto running, and the mental capacity it takes to run an ultra marathon. So for my first interview, it's been an absolute pleasure to interview such a down-to-earth guy like Dave. He says connecting with people on the keto diet community on social media has really helped him in the learning process, as well as keeping him accountable and on track. So go ahead and connect with him over on Instagram and YouTube at AntiGravityGains to follow along his journey of learning and accountability. So please welcome Dave Basile to the Fat for Weight Loss show. Dave, how you doing?
Great, Aaron. How you doing? Hey, man, I really appreciate getting to be on your podcast. This is so cool that you're starting this. I remember we talked on Instagram Live, a couple months ago, and I was like, dude, you're so good at this interviewing stuff. You should really start a podcast. And you're like, I reckon I might do that.
You know what? And I remembered that when I was starting a podcast, and I said to you, I was like, "What if I start a podcast? You are going to be the first person that I have on it because you inspired me to do a podcast." So here we are.
That is great.
However many months later. So yeah, it's really good to be talking to you. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Like I know you're a runner, but tell us more about yourself other than what we can find on Instagram and YouTube and whatnot.
Yeah, that's a good question, really. I mean, I think to an extent I put up a little bit of a mask when it comes to social media because, first of all, you only have so much that you can really display on something like an Instagram story, right? So I usually just try to have a lot of fun with that, but I have a serious side to me too. I have a career in software development, although I'm going into business analysis here pretty soon. I have a wife and a kiddo, so I've got a lot of things going on in life, but as far as Instagram and YouTube, besides being a runner, I grew up, really active type kid. Throw me a ball, I'll catch it, or kick the soccer ball. And I've always just kind of enjoyed sports. I'm not somebody that sits around and watches a lot of sports right now because I'm busy with things and I'd rather participate in being active rather than sit around and watch, marathon watch sports through the weekend. That kind of stopped for me during the end of college, I'd say. But What else? I'm kind of a high-strung guy. I'm sure people have picked up on some of that with some of my rants on Instagram. But I really get into the details of things, and if I'm curious about something, if it grabs me, I really immerse myself into the subject matter. So something like running, as well as low-carb ketogenic diet. Those are some things that have really stuck since I became interested in it, and that's just how I'm wired.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, it's funny you say that you were a software developer, because I was actually a software developer for about 2 or 3 years prior to starting my website. What sort of languages do you develop in mostly?
Well, it's mostly we're a .NET shop, and, so we use C#, but in my early days, about 17, 18 years ago, I was into Java, and then I went to desktop application development for a good 5 or 6 years with Visual Basic 6, and but then got back into web stuff. C# on the back end, JavaScript on the front with some of the newer frameworks like AngularJS. But part of the reason I'm doing this career change, I'm 46 years old, and I've sitting here been reevaluating things. What's my personality like? I'm kind of honing in on that more than what my educational, or my intellectual prowess lens towards. It's more like, what's my personality match up for? Is it being a coder for the next 15 years in my career? And I'm like, no, I think I like interacting with various business units and things like that, being a liaison and getting the requirements and helping roll out software if I'm going to be in that industry, and help conduct user acceptance testing and things like that, and documentation. So I'm going to be a business analyst starting a new gig this Monday. So kind of in a transition phase as far as career goes. So yeah.
Congratulations. I really applaud in, I was a musician for a long time, and I quit being a musician to be a software developer. Really? And I had the exact feeling. Yeah. So I had all this training being a musician, and I stopped doing that and became a software developer. And, it's okay to, leave something behind, because it's not that you're giving up something. You can still find whatever you've found in your previous job in your new job. Like, I was really creative in music, and I just found software developing to be super creative as well. Right. And again, running FatForWeightLoss, it's creative again. So I just have this drive for being creative, and you're going to find the exact same thing in your new job. So it's really awesome to hear you making the jump. But aside from working and aside from running, I follow you on Instagram, and I think you and AD Keto do this a lot, where you do what's called a monster order. Now, can you tell us a little bit about what a monster order is and how you might be able to do one?
Right. So, it's because, it's kind of like small talk gets old after a while. It's like, so a lot of us in the low-carb community, we go through drive-thrus here in the U.S. ordering coffee, espresso, and we're pretty high maintenance, I've found. I'm not the only one in this low-carb community, because you go through a drive-thru and you want an espresso, and you want, like Aaron, the other Aaron, AD Keto, he's got a good monster order, and the idea is to have fun with your order at the intercom, at the speaker in the drive-thru in your car when you're placing your order, and you do a keto monster voice, and you make sure it's a keto-friendly order. But part of the risk there is to see how badly they botch your order, perhaps on purpose, because you're screwing around with them at like 8 in the rush hour, and you're ordering in a keto monster voice, like, I need a venti cafe Americano with butter, grass-fed butter. So it's just some fun we've done on Instagram, and some others like PJ and AD Keto, they've joined in some of the fun. And, I haven't done one for a while, but I'd say I'm about due to do another one. But a lot of the folks here in Kansas City area, in the Midwest of this country, are very receptive to it. But I think Aaron at AD Keto has had worse luck with it out there on the East Coast.
Oh, there you go. Maybe, because I see yours and they're always pretty friendly, and I see Aaron's and they just totally botch it. And, it's funny to watch, but you really feel sorry that he's wasted $5 on trying to get a coffee and has to throw in the bin. Aside from monster orders, keto has been low carb and keto have been a pretty big part of your life. Can you tell us what the motivation behind going low carb or keto was for you, and how that impacts your everyday life and also your running as well, because you're an ultra runner as well?
Right. So there's kind of a multi-pronged answer here, as you can imagine. My weight loss and weight maintenance journey has been, pretty long. I'd say since the year 2004. It's kind of a three-tiered or three-phase type thing in my weight loss and my educational journey, as far as learning about my own body, as far as how it processes macros and things like that, how I lose weight and then maintain it, when I get to a certain plateau or homeostasis, set point, if you will. So I started off with, I was gaining weight slowly but surely over time. I always kind of had like an athletic type build, but, a little extra body fat on there, get 20, 30, even up to 35 pounds overweight at one time. Still able to run and everything, but I got sick and tired of being sick and tired as far as, carrying around that extra weight. And, despite starting my running to help lose weight loss, I lost that first 15 pounds. I was up at 220 pounds at one point, which I'm sorry, I can't translate this into kilos off the top of my head, but for a 5'10" person, at 223 pounds, I was just like, okay, that's a turning point for me. I'm going to start running more consistently instead of just every now and then. So that took me down to a good, I even got that down to about 205 pounds without really changing the junk food I was eating in my diet. And that was between 2004 and 2007. And then after moving to a different city, I really plugged into a running community, a new job I had in Iowa, which is a state here in the Midwest and of the United States. And I ran my first half marathon in the year 2007. So I was, as you can imagine, going from like little 3-milers and 4-milers to running a half marathon, it took more training. So I was being more consistent, had that goal. And that allowed me to, hover around 200, 205 pounds, sometimes dipping down below 200, but, between 198 pounds and 205 pounds. And that was fine. I loved that for a while. That lifestyle was fine with me. Compared to being 220 pounds, I was rather happy with that. But, I would lift weights a little bit here and there, but not very consistently. Then, I got into the half marathons. I had my first marathon in the year 2009. I remember seeing a photo one time at a finish line. I'm like, man, here's this guy that's running, of myself and another friend. And it's like, I have this beer gut, and I don't even drink beer, but I had like this beer gut type of look at the finish line after a marathon. And I'm like, why? I do all this working out, and I'm still carrying around an extra 25 pounds, and what's going on here? So I started kind of ditching the bun anytime I get a hamburger at fast food. So I went pretty low carb, but it wasn't super strict, and I'd kind of flex diet and kind of go off the rails on the weekends. And that helped me lose maybe another 10 pounds. I get down to about 195. And then, I got injured in like 2012. I had a meniscus issue in my knee, and I couldn't run as many miles as some days I'd be able to eke out 3-milers, and other days I couldn't even run across a soccer field chasing my kid around or anything like that. So, I was on the bench, I could not run like I used to. So I had to, and I kind of thought, Aaron, that I would never run another marathon. So I got back into the weight room, and I just, worked out in there and did a little, swimming and things like that to get a little bit of cardio in. And, that was great because I went through a body recomp there. So, I didn't lose a whole lot of weight, maybe got down to 190, but my body changed where it stored its weight in a way. And I was still kind of doing the flex diet. I wasn't doing super low carb keto, but I was kind of ditching some of the carbs and, maybe having some pizza on the weekend and an ice cream treat, So maybe 1 or 2 days a week I'd eat like crap. So I kind of went through that body recomp because I was lifting weights consistently between 2012 and 2014 while that knee injury was healing. I would still get, maybe 10 miles total per week on running if I was lucky. And then suddenly that knee injury alleviated. It kind of self-corrected. And I was able to start ramping up my mileage, running trails. And I forgot to tell you, the second phase of my weight loss journey was also intermittent fasting, which I started in 2011, 2010, somewhere thereabouts. And that helped a lot for me to kind of, I hated counting calories and I hated tracking macros. And that just kind of, I like eating a big meal. So, everybody in the running community always says you have to eat, in the morning before you run, and you have to eat, 4 meals a day and this kind of stuff. And the fitness community in general kind of does that. And that just never really matched me from a natural standpoint. I've always felt unnatural making myself eat when indeed I'm not feeling hungry at all. So intermittent fasting was kind of a natural match for me. Eating, waiting until like noon or 1 o'clock in the afternoon to have my first bite. And that helped get, me down to about 190 consistently, 190 pounds. So getting back into the trail running after my knee self-corrected, I rehabbed that knee, so I had, consistent exercise going already with the weight training and some cardio, and getting back into more consistent running along with my intermittent fasting. I still had this vanity thing to finally get around to your question, how to get into keto, the ketogenic diet. The vanity aspect is what grabbed me, because I'm looking in the mirror a few times, during the week. I think this was this is August 2016. And I'm like, I'm lifting weights 4 to 5 times a week. And depending on where I'm at in the season for, what time of the year for running, I'm running, 3 to 4, sometimes 5 times a week. Now, why is it I'm sitting here at 100 and, upper 180s, and I've got this spare tire around my gut? And granted, it's not as bad as it was a few years prior, but still a muscular build, but I'm carrying all this weight around my midsection. What's going on there? How come I can't have a washboard? Why can't I have washboard abs? Well, obviously there's a little bit insulin resistance is what it comes down to. And I was pretty, still being kind of flex diet, but I was pretty low carbs, during the weekdays and for the most part. And I'm just like, as much as I work out, it's kind of pissing me off, pardon my language. It's kind of pissing me off that I'm doing all this working out. And it's basically abs are made in the kitchen. But, I tried the 40-40-20 breakdown of macros, 40% carbs, 40% protein, 20% fats, which is kind of a standard starting point for a lot of people. And like bodybuilding will kind of start there and deviate from there, find what works best. But it didn't work for me. And I never felt satiated. I never felt full. Anytime I had carbs to that extent, like 40% or more, it was constant battle throughout the day to stop eating when I should, to maintain my body weight or even try to cut weight. So the ketogenic diet, I stumbled across it somehow. I really can't remember how. But, and then I remember discovering like KetoConnect, Matt and Mega early on too. Within a month of starting keto, I saw them out there. And I just latched on. And back to my personality type, I really immersed myself into this community of ours. YouTube, Jimmy Moore's book, Keto Clarity, The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance with Drs. Finney and Volek. Just a bunch of stuff early on. And, I've slipped since, but that's how I got into it. It was vanity, but I discovered that it helped my inflammation issues, joint pain, general aches and pains. It helped stabilize my energy in the afternoons. Never had that afternoon crash anymore. I won't say never. Sometimes that happens. I think sometimes if I'm off on electrolytes, I might feel a little groggy or something in the afternoon, but 90% of the time I don't feel that way anymore. And recovery is the number one benefit, and why I'm hanging around still using the ketogenic diet is really how it's helped my running game with recovery. As far as from an athletic standpoint, that is definitely the biggest advantage of the ketogenic diet, in my opinion.
That's really interesting. So yeah, and I totally agree with the recovery, and we'll get to that in a sec. So you looked at yourself in the finish line, and you sort of weren't happy. And I've felt exactly like that before, and you had that slow introduction of going low carb, and then eventually going keto later on. You use intermittent fasting. What type of intermittent fasting were you using to start off with, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, it was basically a 16-8 or an 18-6, which means, you limit your feeding window down to 8 hours a day and you fast for the other 16. For me, working a day shift, a typical 9 to 5 type job, or 8 to 5 rather, it was easy for me to wake up. I was a guy, I remember even college, even in high school, I just naturally never felt super hungry in the morning. So that was an easy thing to do. Stop eating at like, let's say 7 p.m. at night, let's say 8 p.m. at night. And then in the morning at 8 a.m., you're like, well, rather than forcing myself to eat that half granola bar and banana before I go out for a run or whatever, like everybody says you have to or else you're going to bonk. Rather than do that, how about just follow what I naturally feel and not eat anyway, and just make sure I drink to thirst and go out and run or go into work and then decide when I want to eat. And more often than not, I didn't even have food cross my mind until 11 a.m., 10:30, 11 a.m. Then I thought, okay, well, I'm trying to get to a 16-hour mark here. Let's just kind of push it, see if we can go to noon. So I didn't eat from 8 o'clock the night before. If I don't eat till noon, voila, there you go. I've got myself 16 hours. And I found that, I'll just kind of experiment with that. And in the early days, I kind of thought about the numbers a lot, like, oh, I got to try to make 16, or, oh, now let's try 18. Sometimes 18 was easy to not eat for 18 hours. And sometimes I'd even make it to 20. But, I was pretty consistent with somewhere around 16 to 18 hours daily not eating, and it felt natural. Since going keto, I've noticed a lot of people are like, hey, you ought to try intermittent fasting too. A lot of people find the ketogenic diet first, and then they couple it with intermittent fasting. So they find intermittent fasting afterwards, because being more satiated with a higher fat diet, like the ketogenic diet, is all about low carb, high fat, moderate protein. A lot of people find, wow, I feel like I can kind of skip that morning meal or something like that. For me, it was something I was already doing, the intermittent fasting thing, so I didn't have to think about that too much. I did have to get my adjustment going as far as eating more fats than I used to, healthier fats. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I mean, as you said, most people come to intermittent fasting after going keto because they find it interesting, or they find out through the ketogenic diet that you can, push that eating window closer and closer and closer. And, some people even do 1 and 2 and 7 day fasts and whatnot. And, you sort of teach your body how to burn the fat that's already on your body. Right. But it was interesting what you said about, listening to your own body and, sort of ignoring what other people were telling you to do, because there's this huge stigma especially in running and especially in endurance activities, right, where you have to carb load and you have to try and get as much fuel in your body as possible. Was it hard to sort of step off the popular route and say, no, I'm going to do what feels best for me? Was that hard for you?
It wasn't too hard. I mean, I'm kind of a rebellious type spirit anyway, but in a way it was, because you're plugged into that community, and consensus is so much that you're supposed to eat, damn it. You're crazy if you don't eat, because you're going to bonk if you don't. Now, I think there is a time and place for that, and I have experimented with targeted ketogenic diet in a healthy way, not eating donuts, although some would say, like Courtney DeWalter is an ultra marathon runner. She's amazing. Yes. And she'll eat whatever the hell she wants, and I'm not going to sit here and argue. Some people work with that kind of stuff better than others. Myself, I don't, from my addictive mindset. I am apt to be, spiral out of control if I start on one bite of a donut. It means a dozen for me. So that's how that goes. But I have experimented successfully with a targeted ketogenic diet whereby I use, air quotes here, healthier carbs, with like a sweet potato, and some maybe quinoa and things like that to kind of fill up the glycogen stores again before going out for an ultra marathon race. And I did that, a couple months ago, and I kind of liked it. I'm still forever experimenting with things. And then after that, a month later, I even went the longest distance I had ever gone, a 44-mile race using strict keto. So the benefit, the longer you're doing this thing with the ketogenic diet, is that I find if you, depending on how wrecked your metabolism might have been, or any medical condition you might have, if you get to where you are fat adapted, I'd say after a year, of consistent, ketosis, being in ketosis often for at least a year, being fat adapted, you get a little bit of metabolic flexibility. For some of us, we get that. And I have found that I was able to successfully use a healthier targeted ketogenic strategy on that 50K race, which was in the mud for 6.5 hours in February. And it was very hilly, and it worked really well. I mean, my heart rate was way up there, dealing with muddy hills, trying to get up muddy hills without, fallen and stuff like that. And I found that I liked it, but I also like the strict ketogenic approach too. And I'm really confused, Aaron, because I keep sitting here thinking, well, if you want your heart rate to be anaerobic for a lot of your race, in other words, really kicking it into high gear, you're going to have to use carbs. And I don't think that's true depending on context, because there's somebody on Instagram. I follow runners on Instagram, and some of them are ketogenic runners. This one gal ran the Boston Marathon, what was that, a month ago? And it was crappy conditions. It was rainy. It was windy. It was terrible.
Yeah, it was terrible.
She's keto. She's keto, and she's young, I mean, she did 3 hours and 4 minutes finish, and she did it strict keto. She says, I said, what did you do? Did you do any targeting of carbs, periodizing some carbs, as Zach Bitter would call it, and sneaking in carbs, before the race? And she said, no, maybe I had some more nut butters and some nuts, but I used the UCAN for her electrolytes. She said the orange and the plain flavors are very keto friendly, never kicked me out of keto. And I told her about like Ultima Replenisher, which I found is a nice electrolyte mix that I used on my strict keto run. But yeah, I'm amazed. That means that person, I mean, they're you got to be up in the anaerobic heart rate zone. You're not maffetone zone there. So I think you might be stretching it on some of these races, but even being strict keto, you can really kick ass and run fast, and not bonk.
Yeah. I totally agree, and I listened to a lot of what Mark Sisson was saying before I jumped into the keto marathon and his book, Primal Endurance. And he was saying that, and for anyone who's listening who doesn't know too much about different heart rate zones, maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But basically what he was saying is that if you train in in an aerobic zone, you will eventually get to the point where you can actually push that aerobic zone to being quite fast, right? So maybe the lady who won who did the Boston Marathon in just over 3 hours, it'd be interesting to have a look at her heart rate and to see where that actually was, because she may also be running just in that threshold zone where she's still able to burn a good mix of glycogen and fat at the same time, but still not be pushing into that anaerobic zone. And it just depends on her fitness, really, maybe. But that could be a thing. And I guess that's probably tapping into what you were saying before, how you can run and you can run hard still. But for some of those people, they're just so fit that they're still in that aerobic zone where they can push those types of tempos. But, like we're talking about all these great races like the Boston Marathon and, all of these fantastic running experiences. But what are the greatest races and, some of the distances you've covered? Because you were talking about the Brew to Brew, where you did the 44 miles, which is the longest run you've ever done. And I think you're insane. But, and, it's so great to see other people doing that, and could you let us know on maybe some of the runs you did in Colorado, for instance?
Right. Now, I lived in Colorado as a kid for 4 years, but I was a kid and I wasn't into running. We were into snow skiing and I was playing soccer and things like that. But I just love Colorado, and anytime I can get over there, I do. It's one state away. I don't get there often, but Leadville, Colorado is a popular destination. We actually skied in a little ski resort that was near there when I was a kid, which still happens to be there, but it has become a very popular landmark in Colorado where people run the 100-mile distance, and they also have a 50-mile distance as well as a regular marathon distance. And so, I'm not ready for a 50-miler or 100-miler yet, but I did sign up for the marathon one back in 2016. And I actually signed up for that very early that year. So I was just like, and I don't usually commit to a race very early like that. Usually I'm running something pretty local within 2 hours of me, and I just kind of wait to see what the weather's like. But, Leadville is like, I really wanted to prepare for it. And in fact, I was kind of experimenting with a less is more type approach that year. I was really focusing on my lifting, but also running. And I was doing the stair stepper and incline walking and things like that, not just running. I was really trying to have a variety of ways to be working cardio on tired legs. So sometimes I'd even do a leg lift with weights, a day or two before a cardio session, and not run as long of a distance, but see how, kind of simulate some of that pain and some of that grit that you need to get through that. And I'm glad I did that, because that race has so many ups and downs, and those ups, it starts at 10,200 feet elevation. And the highest point for the marathon, which is actually, I think it gets to a higher point than even their 100-miler, because they have different routes for the other two distances, but is 13,185. And first of all, I just love Colorado, and the scenery was just, I have a YouTube video from, it's, a couple of years old or whatever, but I just really enjoyed it. I just love the mountains. I'm a mountain guy, and I love the ocean too. As a kid, I got to be around the ocean, but if I had to pick, I'd pick the mountains, man. Just because I think it's God's country. It's just beautiful. And other than that, my favorite races have been around here in the Midwest and northeastern Kansas. They have a lot of single track trail races here, put on by a great race director, Ben Holmes, with Trail Nerds is the organization, his group, and he puts on a bunch of races each year with various distances from 5Ks at nighttime. You can get your kids out and run that, or a 50-miler, or a 100K. And I've run a few of his 50K distances, and believe it or not, here in Kansas, the land of Oz, there's some hills in this area of Kansas, and it's pretty tough with rocks and roots and all that kind of stuff. Not Leadville, Colorado tough, but indeed tough.
Yeah. Look, and, I think training on those types of hills really sets you apart when you actually go and do the distance, because when you are running I haven't run a marathon yet. I'm about to run a marathon in 6 weeks' time from now, and maybe I would have already run it by the time this podcast is out, but who knows? And I think what happens when you start running distances like that is you have to have a supreme mental attitude towards running, and you have to be able to push through some pretty painful, pain caves, as they call it. Right. And that's why I think, athletes make good parents, because they've been able to suffer for a long time and they know how to suffer in times of bad to, push through and get to the good stuff. But, what do you think helps someone push through the pain of running? Because if someone's just starting out running, obviously that pain is going to come much, much quicker than if you're pretty accustomed to running and you're doing 50Ks. But, I'm sure you must have it as well. Running never gets easier. You just go faster, right? Right. And how do you push past those, those little roadblocks while you're running those big distances?
You break it down. I'll tell you what, it all depends on context, what your goals are. This Emily gal on Instagram that ran this Boston 3 hours and 4 minutes. My fastest road race marathon was 3 hours and 28 minutes. It's like just a second or two below an 8-minute per mile pace. And that was in 2012 in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it's hard, depending on what your goals are. Like I was trying to get to 325, and I didn't get it, but, those painful moments in a marathon, there are going to be those, depending on your goal. I've run a 3:33 finish time in Omaha, and it was easy. I could run another 5 miles, but I wasn't running quite as fast. Usually there's going to be pain points, and you've just got to break down what's the next milestone, so to speak. Where in an ultra marathon, the way I did the 44-miler, which was not in the trails, it was a point-to-point race from a brewery here in Kansas City, Missouri area to another town called Lawrence, Kansas, which is just right across the state line in Kansas, where the University of Kansas was, where I went to college. But that was a 44-mile race on partial paved roads as well as some gravel roads. And I'll tell you what, being somebody that has loved running trails and focused on single-track hilly trails in the woods for the last 4 or 5 years, running that road race on really flat ground with long stretches and not very many turns was actually very difficult for me, because you get into more of a monotonous mode. and you've got to use different trickery, like, okay, just get to the next aid station, or get to that next landmark, then stop and stretch and walk for 30 seconds. It depends on how much pain you're in and what your goal is, as far as how hard you're going to push. For that 44 miler, I had run the 50K about 6 weeks before, but I hadn't trained very much between them as far as very long distance runs on the weekends. I'd run maybe a 16 miler since I ran that 31 mile race, and that was it. And now I'm going for 40. It was on a whim. I signed up for the 44 mile race. So my goal was to
I remember you signing up for it.
My goal was to keep my heart rate down, stay strict keto, and sure, stop and walk whenever needed, but, try to just finish without dying. And, I've finished other regular marathon distance races in more pain, but the flat course and it being on the streets and on the gravel roads and not many turns, and you're looking out on the horizon and you're just kind of, it can be dazzling, it can be challenging to get through that. And, the last 8 miles were rough for me, and especially the last 4.5. I dropped my pace down dramatically simply because I wasn't trained well enough as far as having enough time on my feet, before that race. But being fat adapted allowed me to get through it. And it also, despite being very sore walking away from that finish line at the end, down a little hill, my quads killing me and stuff like that. That recovery took me like a day and a half compared to, being completely wasted after a marathon in 2012 in Cincinnati, my fastest, taking like 3 days before I feel I can climb up one set of stairs, on the standard American diet, standard Western diet. So there's a huge difference in recovery, and I'm sorry for the long-winded answer, but I really wanted to circle back to that too.
Yeah, no, it's I'm all about long-winded answers. I love it. And that sort of ties back into recovery, what we were going to talk about before. And you said it took a day and a half for you to recover from this 44-mile race, which for anyone who lives outside of America, I think that's about 70 kilometers. And that's a long way to run, right? And I have run 26 Ks so far. That's my longest distance, and it took me a day and a half to recover from that. 70 Ks and a day and a half to recover. That's incredible. Like, what do you think about recovery using the ketogenic diet? Because the ketogenic diet, or low carb in general, is very low inflammatory. Sorry, it is a low inflammatory diet, which basically means, forced stress from running so much, you get a lot of oxidative inflammation just from running those sorts of distances. But, using a low heart rate and using the ketogenic diet, how do you think that compares in recovery to, say, the 3-minute 28 marathon that you ran? Because are you burning different types of fuel, and are those different types of fuel going to affect how you recover, do you think?
Well, I think it does. Everything I've researched, and read, like, Finney and Bullock books, and I listen to so many different podcasts. There's just so many people like Peter Attia and just so many others, as you mentioned, Sisson and the Primal Blueprint, and there's just tons out there. But, a lot of people talk about how, fat is a cleaner energy source. And I believe that to be true. I found, even with lifting weights, that recovery is a lot better too. But I'm not sure how it really works off the top of my head. I think if I'm not mistaken, I heard somebody say something about, your body burns fat and glucose. It's not like it burns only one or the other all the time. And I don't know if I'm remembering that wrong or not, but I just think that ratio, is different when you're fat adapted and you follow a ketogenic or very low carb diet. As an athlete, I think that ratio, your body more effectively burns fat. It can burn it more readily and doesn't have to rely on glucose. And it being a cleaner energy source, I don't remember how all that works as far as inflammation. I know I've heard you talk about, listening to Ben Greenfield and some others out there like that, where it talks about how there's certain supplements and things that allow you to recycle some of the lactic acid and things like that. But, back to Dr. Finney's and Bullock's book, Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Performance, I remember them saying that, there's been studies, maybe anecdotal, I'm not sure or not, but indicating that there's lower amount of lactic acid buildup when you're keto adapted and you're using a ketogenic diet during your athletic endeavors. So I found that to be pretty much true for my case. There are some days I come home even from like a 6 miler and I've run it real fast or something, and I've stayed strict keto and everything, and perhaps I didn't have a good balance of electrolytes, a day or two leading up to it, and I feel more cramped up than I normally do. But it's more far and few between now than how it was when I was on a standard Western diet.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And one question I do get a lot while we're on the topic of fueling for these different types of runs, how do you prepare for something like a 70-kilometer, 44-mile run in terms of nutrition? Do you use just electrolytes? Like, do you use salt and those types of things, or do you use other types of fuel as well? Like, what does that look like?
I'll tell you what happened with that. I'll just kind of recap that. Let me just really emphasize that I did not prepare for that training-wise well at all. I mean, I have a good base of running behind me, and I ran a 50K in the mud 6 weeks prior to that 44-mile race, and it was on a different terrain. It was very wet and hilly and rooty and rocky, and this was on a very flat course. So I did not have the time under my feet, the volume of mileage that I should have had, but I was able to get away with that one, by just keeping my heart rate low. I mean, I started off running a 10-15 per mile pace, and that's very hard for a guy like me to do because I want to run, a little bit above that, that threshold and get more into like a 9-minute pace, which I inevitably did for about 10 miles from about mile 11 to about mile 21. And I think that probably caught up with me on the latter miles later in the race. But as far as how I prepared, honestly, Aaron, I did not do anything different. I stayed strict keto. Going into the race, I did not target in any sweet potato that time or anything like that because I knew I was going to keep, strict keto on that. Kind of as a comparison, too, to how it was with the TKD on the 50K prior, 6 weeks before. And I did use something called, I found ProBar puts out like a goo-like packet. It's chocolate and coconut peanut butter. I think it's chocolate and peanut butter. And it's organic or whatever, but it's in a yellow packet. I did a YouTube goofy review on it. I like to do, just kidding around in the car. But I liked it a lot. I think it has natural sugars in it. It's about 5. It's kind of high on sugars as far as keto goes, 5 grams, but the net carbs are something like 4 per packet. And I had 5 of those during the race, the 44-mile race. Now, on an ordinary day sitting at home, normal 30-minute workout in the gym or something like that, that's not something I'm going to sit there and eat. During a race, I call that strict keto still because it's nothing. It's very low carb, definitely. Relatively speaking. Definitely not kicking me out of keto. But its fat to protein ratio is such that the fat is higher than the protein too. So,
yeah. And just for anyone who's wondering, a normal athlete who's going out and doing these types of runs would be inducing maybe 30 grams of carbs an hour. So, having 5 of those throughout the race is nothing. And, compared to other athletes who are fueling mostly on carbs, they have to carry a lot of fuel with them. They have to carry a lot of gels and, different sugar types of, types of fuel. But, when you're just carrying things like nut butters or, these Pro bars, which I'll link to in the show notes as well, you actually have to carry less things, which is not only going to save you a little bit of weight, but you're not having the GI distress of constantly having to, try and eat these different things and having to switch it up because you get sick of the same flavor all the time. And, prior to going keto, I had the same thing where, by gel 4 or gel 5, you just had it. You've absolutely had it. And you have to get these things down, otherwise you'll bonk. Whereas on the ketogenic diet, you don't. You really don't. And you can, push through those walls and sort of come out the other side pain-free. So, yeah, it's really interesting how you have, and what sort of things do you use?
Sorry to interrupt. So I have 5 of those, throughout the 44 miles. But I also had a bag of mixed nuts, which was predominantly, it was It had macadamia and pecans and almonds for the most part. It might have had a little bit in there, but just one bag of those, and I trickled that in. It's kind of like what Zach Bitter says. He trickles in. Now, I'll get back to the TKD later on that, but he has a different methodology as far as trickling, what he's trickling in. But I decided to trickle the mixed nuts, over the course of like the last 10 or 15 miles. It was, a 2.5 serving type thing you get at a convenience store, and, I stretched it out over that. But I did have 5 salt pills spread throughout the race too. And I also had the Ultima Replenisher for electrolytes, as well as Noon electrolyte tablets. Okay. And then at aid stations, because this was a relay race, so there's teams out there and they're all drinking, having fun. It's Brew to Brew. That's the name of the race. And so what sucks about being a solo racer where you're racing the whole 44 miles, and I won't even call it races, just say we're just trying to get home, trying to finish. You see these people having fun, partying. They got their cars, people dropping off their next teammate to run the next leg, Everybody's on fresh legs around you except for the other poor chaps that are running the solo version. So I had pickles at aid stations, and, I would always top off my water bottles that are in my Ultimate Direction vest that I wear, because in Leadville I made the mistake of not topping off the bottle at one aid station, and it caught up with me, so I remember that lesson. But that's what I had. I had pickles at almost every aid station. I had my Noon and Ultima Replenisher electrolytes, as well as the 5 yellow packets that are kind of like a goo-like packet of the chocolate peanut butter mix, and then the mixed nuts. That was it. But sorry to interrupt.
Interesting. No. It's really interesting because I've had so many questions about this, and people say, "What do you fuel with? How do you get through a race like that?" So that's really awesome information for those people who want to go out and try those different products. So you can get through 70 Ks using that sort of stuff. It must be tough seeing all these people run past with a beer, and you're going, "No way, I'm not touching that."
And it's really interesting to be fat adapted. A really good indicator. Let's say if you're not testing ketones and all that stuff, which I've experimented a little bit with that, but I don't think I can do that much, often. But I did it enough to see how that goes. But a really good indicator as a runner, especially a long distance runner, if you can run comfortably, for like 3 hours, maybe 4 hours, and not taking any food. Maybe just electrolytes, salt tabs and water. Maybe a Noon electrolyte tablet, Zell. You're fat. That's a great indicator of fat adaptation. I've done many training runs with no fuel except for electrolytes, sometimes skipping the electrolytes on 3-hour runs, but 3 and 4 hour runs without taking in any food calories at all.
Yeah, that's interesting, because when I started training for this marathon, I ran 16 Ks trying to do it without any type of fuel, and I bonked. And bonking, for anyone who doesn't know, is basically when your blood sugar drops into a very low state and you go all fuzzy and you can't really, run much more and you have to walk. Has there been any points in races where you feel like you're about to bonk or you're about to, go into a low blood sugar state? And if so, have you been able to come out of those, or has it not been a problem for you?
Well, it's been a problem on the standard Western diet. And this, I swear this was right before my knee injury too. I was kind of on track to beat my personal record of 3 hours and 28 minutes. And the last 10K, like the last 5 or 6 miles, I hit that wall. And I was able to hobble and walk and kind of jog a little bit. But I went from almost beating my personal best by a few minutes. I was going to get more of a 3 hour and 25 minute finish, 3 hours, 26 minutes, to I ended up like 3 hours and 38 minutes or something like that. So I lost a lot of time on that. And that was a bonk. Bonk, some people will define that as you cannot be peeled up off the ground. That's kind of truly what a bonk really, classic, road race type bonk is like you are just done. Game over, and you just have to sit there until hopefully you can, recoup enough to where you can get up and kind of start jogging in again. I've had stuff like what I described though, where it's just basically it's all the air is taken out of the wheels. I've just flattened out. I've had that a couple times. But as far as recently, that 44 miler, I'm telling you, it was The last 4.5 miles, I got to the last aid station before the finish, and it was from a gravel country road, and it was out on a levee near the river, the Kansas River. And I said, how much do we have left? Because my Garmin died at 6 hours. And the guy at the aid station, one of the volunteers, which shout out to all volunteers at all races, by the way, they're awesome. He said, you got 4.5 miles, and right down there is University of Kansas. Can you see the Fraser Hall, the towers there and everything? And I was like, yep. And I had to turn opposite because the levee runs alongside the river by the way the river flows. So even though out on the horizon, towards where the finish is, out west, we're turning back to the southeast for a little long loop to get there. As the crow flies, it would have been 2.5 miles. But you're sitting there and you're flattened out and you're like near bonk. So here's what I did, Aaron. I'm just like, I know I'm starting to, my breathing's erratic. I'm not breathing this smoothly, and I'm still at a 10, 15 pace. And it's like, man, I'm really starting to deteriorate really bad now. And I was like, that's all right, man. I'm going to do half-mile jog. I don't even care if it's 11.5 minute pace. And then I'm going to walk for 30 seconds. Well, that worked for the first half mile. Then all of a sudden I had to revise my goal and go a quarter mile. Then I had to revise my goal and then go a tenth of a mile. And so those last 4.5 miles took a long time, but it really affected my overall pace. But I avoided complete bonk by doing that. And I got, long distance runners, the problems are going to come up, especially in an ultra distance race. And easily in a marathon race and a half marathon race, if you're new to it, these problems are going to come up. So I heard somebody describe, part of the game is just really being good at problem solving, because problems are going to come up.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's not if they come up, it's when, right?
Every once in a while you get lucky and you have a great race, like I had in Omaha, Nebraska. And I felt like, man, I could run another 5K, but that's kind of a Cinderella type race, Well, I didn't push myself hard enough.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's sometimes everything can sort of line up. But, I wanted to ask you this question, and, I think running these types of distances, running half marathons, running ultra marathons, they really teach you a lot, not only just in life, but, how to go out there and spend, 7-8 hours by yourself, really. So what has running taught you that nothing else could have?
Oh man, that you can do so much more than you think you can. If you're like me, you're your own worst enemy. Just get the shitty committee drowned out of your head and do whatever it takes. To hone in on the positive voice. It's somewhere down in there. You can do something. And the more you do this, the more you can reflect back on times where, but remember that one time in Mason City, Iowa, where it was super windy and you're in a headwind for 75% of that race and you got through that? Well, you can get through this too then. So you gain some of that experience, and it's amazing. I wish I was better at taking how I am with that kind of mindset in long distance racing and putting it into the rest of my life. Because, I think it's applicable to life, and I'm just not very good at remembering to use those tricks in the rest of my life. I do sometimes, but in running, it's becoming pretty natural, And I also love this idea of failure, that, hey, I might fail. And that's kind of the sick-headedness, hey, let's go run this 44 mile. The weather doesn't look too horrible, and it won't be a muddy trail race this time. And no, you haven't trained yet, Dave, but what's the worst that could happen? You don't finish.
Yeah, that's exactly. I remember listening to a Tim Ferriss podcast, and he was talking to another guy called Tim, and his motto was hurry up and fail. And it's basically, pushing to the point where you fail and you learn from that. And as you said before, all of these different experiences just give you more experience when you go out the second time to do it again. So whether that's running, whether that's the ketogenic diet, you've already been through those really hard processes and really hard positions, and you've been able to get yourself out of them. And you just look back on that and you go, well, at least it wasn't as bad as that. So if it teaches you anything, that's probably the strongest point right there.
And you bring up a good point about the ketogenic diet, because, I find the second year, like I'm almost through my second year of using the ketogenic diet. I don't like using the word cheat meal or cheat day, because I don't like associating kind of the unethical connotation that the word cheat has with how I eat. If I'm going to go have a donut, it's because I feel like being an idiot the way I'm going to eat today, and that's what I'm going to do. Maybe there's another definition of the word cheat, that I'm cheating myself out of lean gains or something like that, or out of progress. Okay, I can kind of understand that, but I'm not fooling anybody. I know what I'm doing when I go off plan if I have a donut. But what I brought that up is because I want to bring up a bigger point, is that the longer you're in the ketogenic diet, and you might have some of those slip-ups, those relapses, if you will, you can't beat yourself up, man, and don't feel like you're a cheater, pumpkin eater, like there's an unethical thing going on here. We are faced with these foods, it just is what it is. The supply out there, 90% of it is garbage. And so that is a very difficult thing to do compared to something like quitting smoking or quitting alcohol or something like that, some other bad habit. It's a different ballgame. We got a lot of odds stacked against us, and we have to put stuff in our mouth nutritionally. So we do have to, and ultimately it's a choice, but it's okay to have these failures. Try not to have them. Try to get keto adapted. Don't think of this as such a short game, like, oh man, I just wasted 3 weeks. Now what am I going to do? I got to get keto adapted all over again. I went through keto adaptation 2 really big times. I went off plan for like 6 weeks one time my first year. So you got to be stubborn enough to look at this. Really, if there's a takeaway from my talk on keto here today, is that you're worth it, and don't give up too soon. Trust the process, even if you have relapses. It's going to happen, and guess what? It's going to get easier, because I haven't gone out and had one of my favorite donuts. I know exactly where they're at, what shelf they're on, and I know I can get them for half price after 3 p.m. if there's any left. And, I know exactly where that is. That was so tempting the first 6 months doing the ketogenic diet, and I fell prey to it, and it got me, and that's okay. I got me. I'm the one that did it, right? But don't think of it like you're a cheater or don't get down on yourself. It's hard, but just pick yourself back up and hop back on. It gets easier the longer you're into this ketogenic way of eating, this low carb way of eating.
Definitely. And I think, a lot of people treat keto more as a sprint, and, sort of to tie this back into this whole conversation, treat it as a marathon, because it is that. And, those little slip-ups are just those really hard hills that you had to get up. And, you'll get over the other side and look back and go, wow, I'm so glad I didn't beat myself up about that, because, I got back on, and I'm still running, I'm still going, I'm still eating keto, and I think that's really important, because a lot of people struggle with that psychologically. And it's important to just, if you've done it once, you know that it's bad. You don't need anyone to tell you that. And
you raise a great point.
Yeah, you don't want to make it feel worse.
You raise a good point. A lot of people talk about having a bad relationship with food and things like that. Well, what about the relationship with yourself? So you're going to kick the shit out of yourself because you slipped up and ate 3 donuts, and you went off the rails, and then you had ice cream. Okay, maybe you might perceive that as a bad relationship with food, because once you start on the garbage, you go downward spiral on it or whatever. But then you beat yourself up about it. And I think that it's more important to not have a bad relationship with yourself, how you treat yourself for something like that happens. Try to learn from, the slip up, learn from the mistake, and move forward, and trust the process, so that the more and more you string together these 4 and 8 week things where you don't slip up, and then all of a sudden, hey, I haven't had a slip up for 4 months, celebrate that by not having garbage dessert or something, and make an awesome, fat bomb straight from FatForWeightLoss or somebody like you, and do it that way. Just recognize you're worth it, and you're not supposed to sit there and beat yourself up over stuff like this.
Yeah, I totally agree. And for a long time, I put food on a pedestal as well. And so I feel the exact same way. But, I want to sort of bring this all around and talk about a few, just quick questions.
Right.
And these are just little rapid fire ones that you can, just let me know the first thing that comes to your head. And hopefully this might be able to help someone out there as well. But the first one is, what is your favorite low-carb food?
Man, it's got to be a ribeye steak. It's got to be. But, it's got to have the – I got to have the butter on it. I'm a grill guy. I'm like my buddy Scott. Scott, Keto Dad down in Florida, man. He's a grill guy too. But I'll tell you what, like Steve, Keto Pack, he's got this reverse searing thing. Him and 80 Keto had a video on it. But I do mine on the grill, man. And I'll tell you what, my wife does a good marinade for it. I don't remember what else she puts in there. But
I recently went to an American restaurant here in West End, and the way that they do meat is just phenomenal. Right. So kudos to you guys. There is something that you can do with, I had, what did I have? I had the brisket. And it was just so delicious, so good. But the next one, what is your least favorite low-carb food? Is there something that you just don't eat and despise eating that, you just leave off your plate altogether?
You know what? I haven't found a whole lot of things that I don't like the taste of low-carb. I guess maybe I haven't ventured out enough. But let's get back to this whole relationship with food. Now I'm going to make fun of this thing. My relationship with avocados. Those pesky avocados, they're just so moody. It's like you got to time them just right. They go bad, or they're not ripe when they're supposed to be and ready to eat when they're supposed to be. Yeah. So I love avocados, but sometimes I hate them.
Yep. I always remember this photo of, it's not ripe, and then, it's overripe. And you've missed that window, and it's been like 5 minutes. And a really good tip, actually, because I learned this from an avocado picker a long time ago. And is when people go into a shop and they test for ripe avocados, they always squeeze the sides of the avocado, but the best way is to actually squeeze the top. Really? Sort of where it would come off the tree. So if you squeeze that and that's pretty soft, then you know that the avocado is perfect. If that's not soft, then it means the whole avocado is either not ripe, or if that's way too squishy, then you put that one back and you go and try another one. But yeah, so many people squeeze the sides, and he's like, no, squeeze the top. Everyone squeezes the sides, and they're always bruised and whatnot. So yeah, squeeze the top. It's like just using your index finger, you can touch the top and feel if it's sort of firm or not. But yeah, I think that's the best way, and I've found that's pretty good
somebody said something about like a brown lunch bag. If you put them in, if they're too hard, you put them in there for a day and they'll ripen faster. I don't know if there's any truth to that. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there is, but who's got time for that? I always just put them in. So what's your favorite type of training run? Like there's lots of different training runs out there, and I'm sure you've probably experienced a lot of them, but do you have a favorite one that, someone can try?
Oh, wow. I'm going to advise people to go out and get on single track trail. I mean, any distance on there, especially with rolling cruising hills, doesn't have to be steeps, but stuff. I like stuff with rocks and roots because I heard somebody describe this as dancing on the trails. It's like you're light-footed. It's a touch-and-go thing. You don't want to have to negotiate around and avoid all these rocks. I love getting on a single-track trail where there's enough technicality to it, that is some rocks or roots, to where it tests your agility. Jack be nimble, Jack be quick. It's like, and step on the rocks. It's quick. Rather than finding, the path of least risk, from something like rolling your ankle, think about what's going to carry your momentum the best. Well, you're going to end up rock hopping because the way the gravity's working on that trail. What's going to keep your propel going? Anybody that's got an adventurous spirit, I think, as a runner, should go out and try single track trails if you have them, especially if they have that kind of stuff, and keep practicing that to where you're not just weaving in and around the rocks and avoiding the danger. Explore stepping on these rocks with a light foot. any distance on that. I mean, you're going to find this is an amazing type of workout. It's going to test you. It's a good workout. There's a lot of heart rate, fluctuation on that kind of stuff, but it's exhilarating, and I love it. And I've rolled. You're going to fall. You're going to fall eventually. You're going to fall.
What do you do when you fall? Do you just pick yourself back up and brush off the dirt?
Yeah, pretty much. I've had one really close call to putting a rock in my face on a fall. I ended up with my arm tucked into my chest, and I hit my shoulder and even got dirt on my cap. And I'm like, I can't believe I got away without scratching my face on that one or just bruising up, getting a black eye. But there's many times, you roll your ankle and it's amazing. If you're light-footed, your instincts are to let off that weight, keep that roll as insignificant as possible. It's amazing how you can react to that, especially if you're being nimble, if you're being light-footed. But sometimes it just catches you where you had a lot of weight on it, and it sucks,
Yeah. There's always that saying, don't let the carpet be pulled from don't let the carpet be pulled from underneath you. Learn to dance on a shifting carpet. And dancing on those rocks is probably a lot of fun.
As far as a road or flat surface race, Aaron, I love something like 400s, to do some speed training. It's been a while. I remember liking that type of training. But even if you're not on a track or something, maybe if you're just out on one of your favorite routes, just really blasting the downhills. Some intervals. That you just kind of make up. I think people call that fartleks or something like that. There's a word for it in the running community.
Yeah, fartleks. I only just learned about those recently, and they're some people hate them, some people love them. But yeah, basically, running as fast as you can to that next pole, or sort of getting a little bit of speed work in there, because on the ketogenic diet, you run slow quite a lot, and that teaches your body to run slow. But you've got to introduce some fast bits in there. So yeah, that's great advice. What book or video have you has recently inspired you to want to change something, or go out there and run more, or is there something that you've read or watched recently?
Gosh, as it relates to running, I'm not quite sure. I watch a lot of like Kilian Jornet, who's a mountain. He's like a sky runner.
How do you spell his name?
Kilian, Kilian, Jornet. He's Jornet. He's from northern Spain, right below France, in the what's the range of mountains there? I forget, but
is it the?
Yeah, I believe it is. And I think his fiance is Emily. She's from like Sweden or something like that. They're both elite runners. But Kilian's amazing. You want to talk about that? I don't know how people can even compete against that guy. It's just, I mean, we're talking about, he's on, it's Kilian, Kilianjornet. I follow him on Instagram, but he'll be up on these ridge lines and mountains, and there's like death on the left and the right, and he's flying. There's a famous Canary Islands race that just happened, in fact. And I think I've seen him down there. I don't know if he made it this year. I think he's recovering from an injury, but he's one of my favorites. And Anton Krupika is another. He's an American here, but he lives in Boulder, and he's one I follow on Instagram. He does a lot of mountain, skimo and mountain climbing and things like that, bicycling and running. You ought to follow that guy because you're into bicycling too, Eric. So yeah, I should definitely follow him. And I'm pretty sure. So tying this back to what we're talking about, there was a Joe Rogan podcast where he interviewed Zach Bitter, and I think they may have brought up Kilian. They did. I listened to it just recently.
Yeah, and Courtney DeWalter as well. And Courtney was the one that was shoveling jelly beans down her mouth before she went for a run, and she said, as long as I'm full of jelly beans, that's when I'm ready to run. And you just go, wow. There's some very different people.
So there's another guy, Avery Collins. Now there's some controversy with this runner, but he's amazing. He is an advocate of cannabis, but not during races, or anything like that. But it's been legalized in the state of Colorado, cannabis. And I watched a documentary on like Netflix or Amazon Prime, Man, dang it, I wish I could tell you what it was. It was so great. It was down in Ouray, Colorado, the Ouray 100, and it's an extremely difficult race that he won. And he got off course by like 15 miles, and he still won it. He was in dead last because of that, and he came back and won it. Dang it, what was it?
That's amazing. It's so amazing to see those types of athletes, come from either being second or third or last even, to win. There was a mountain bike race that happened here in the Com Games in Australia. And I think it was one of the New Zealand guys. He was first for so long, and he blew his back tire, and he was second, and he did the lap in an extraordinary time and ended up coming first. And it's so amazing to see those feats of athleticism to go past. But I think for those people out there who run, they probably also listen to music as well. Do you listen to music when you run, or what music have you been listening to recently that's really caught your attention?
So a lot of my running, I listen to podcasts, but there are times, if I'm running a track, I'll listen to music. And my music, I'm 46 years old, but I've always listened to quite a lot of different kinds of music. Anything from the Doors and Led Zeppelin back in, the old days to, even like Elvis, I love Elvis too, but, but metal, like Faith No More back in the days, great. Rage Against the Machine. I love, some Metallica and Megadeth and just all that stuff. But man, Pantera, and then you get into like 311, which is like a fusion of rap and metal, and System of a Down back to the metal. I love Tool. They're very mathematical type, intricate industrial sound, but
sounds amazing.
There's some hip hop stuff. I love Beastie Boys too. But I know you're into funk and stuff like that, but I love stuff like, I can listen to like Cyndi Lauper, Time After Time. What an amazing song, right? I mean, but as far as a good,
Fleetwood
Mac's great too.
Or is it Cyndi Lauper? Yeah. Well, she's
a solo artist back from the 80s, but, there's just, what is one of my favorite, like Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. You want to freaking just get to a good cadence.
Fantastic
I mean, and they're like the Police, Regatta de Blanc. The Police used to be my favorite band when I was about 10 years old. I love them. Yeah. I think they're brilliant. I think Stuart Copeland's an amazing drummer. They're all amazing, but there's some, like the song Regatta de Blanc's great to run to. It's got a tribal type sound, but music's great. But when I'm out on the trails, I don't put any music in. I'm out there to be in nature for the most part, and I don't even listen to podcasts when I'm out in the single track trail, where there's woods. You got to concern yourself. There might be a runner coming up behind you that's saying, hey, on your left, and you're not hearing them, things like that.
And in most races, you're not allowed to listen to music as well.
I think that's true. Some of them are allowing you to have one earbud in, I think, on the single track trail stuff. But, but if you're out training, some people put them in and helps you get through some of the walls and things like that. But I usually I kind of just don't like being tethered to, electronics. I almost hate having my Garmin on, my GPS watch. But,
yeah, it's one of those things, and you go out and your Garmin runs out of battery, and you're like, I can't show everyone that I ran that extra 2 miles, but actually you're doing it yourself. Your body knows if you're lying or not. So
I haven't done the Strava thing yet, but back to like learning from experience. Let me tell you, one of the things I'm going to remember with road races, especially, bring the freaking music, because on that 44 miler, I guarantee a couple Led Zeppelin songs, a couple heavy metal songs, would have got me a lot better average pace. And I would have, been inspired to keep running and pushing a little bit harder than I did. On that flat, monotonous course, with very few turns, I really should have had some music available to me.
I think, from my experience, when you're going really, really hard, like if you're running a really hard race, music tends to put you off. But, when you're in that long, flat, dead straight sort of area, it's so helpful. And sometimes, it's good to train without music, because when you actually get to a race like that, you have to have the music. It's like this crutch, but Yeah, and there's also this other thing. In music, there's something called beats per minute, and it's sort of like the tempo of what music goes at. And they say for a injury-free running, you should be running at about 180 or 170 beats per minute, and it's like steps per minute, and that ends up being what drum and bass is mostly at. And so if you've ever tried running to drum and bass, it's a totally different thing. But if you try and run to the beat of that music, you'll get into a pretty good rhythm of, getting that cadence going pretty well and having a good step pattern and, sitting in that green area. So if you haven't tried that,
I have to look it up again, but he gave me there's a site you can look at. If you find you have one of these songs that really gets you in a good rhythm, you can kind of go to I think there's a website you can go plug that in and it tells you what beats per minute it is and what other songs also have a similar beats per minute range or whatever to that song. So that's very interesting. I need to hit him up on that to find out what that is. But you bring up something really important, which is you said something about preventing injury. And, I found with the ketogenic diet, I haven't had a knee injury since. And, I have some aches and pains here and there, but nothing. I mean, my inflammation's gone down, joint pains and all that way down compared to how I used to eat. But you have been kind of showing this, I think you had a YouTube video on it, talking about this book about injury prevention for running, injury-free or whatever by Brad. Oh,
yes. Yeah, so Brad Beer, he's a runner here in Australia, and he's a physio, mainly physio. His stories, he basically started out as a triathlete, and he would always have pain in the run leg, and it was just this crutch for him. And he ended up becoming a physio to actually, understand why running was such a problem for him. And he sent me this book called You Can Run Pain Free, and it's by Brad Beer, and I'll link it in the description. But yeah, he sent it to me, so thanks, Brad. But he's got a podcast as well called The Physical Performance Show, and he just recently interviewed Gwen Jorgensen, who came first in the triathlon. She won gold in the triathlon. She's from Canada. Sweet. Fantastic athlete. And so he's amazing. But that book is all about, preventing injury and, being proactive with injury as well. So really learning where your weaknesses are and trying to strengthen those in different ways. And I know you do a lot of gym work as well to prevent injury.
I do it mainly just to just kind of have a better overall muscle balance. A lot of it's vanity and everything like that, but I've always kind of lifted weights in high school and stuff. I was a soccer player, but I was just kind of a meathead too, more like an American football player would be. And we had weight training class in high school, and I was just kind of a strong guy. And I was into lifting. So I love, lifting, and I got back into doing it consistently when I had that knee injury. But I also believe it's really important for runners because we kind of get into this range of motion, which we kind of neglect, like the adductor and abductor movements, doing your lateral leg motion is super important for runners, in my opinion. You don't have to get out there and squat and deadlift super heavy if you're a runner or anything like that. But I think it's good to do your shoulders and your arms and chest just to kind of bring in more muscle balance into your overall body because, our bodies go through wear and tear. And I think it's good to just keep everything, in shape.
Yeah, I totally agree, and you bring up something really interesting is that, trying to prevent injury and, sort of keep in shape. But is there anything that you would sort of advice that you would give to someone who was just starting to train for a marathon or was just starting one of their long distance runs, or, it doesn't have to be a marathon. It's just the longest run that they've ever done. And they set this goal for it and they're going to train for 12 weeks or whatever it is. And is there any advice that you would give to someone like that to help them along the way? Because obviously you've done lots of long distance running before. Like, what advice would you give to someone like that?
Well, the number one thing I would say is go to a running shoe specialty store and get your gait analysis done. If not that, at least bare minimum, get some shoes, spend some good money on shoes. Don't get the cheapest shoes out there. Invest in this goal that you have before yourself because there are better shoes than others. Some, regular kind of cross-trained, just kind of normal run-of-the-mill athletic shoes aren't really usually the best thing for running. Can you get away using those? Sure, you can. But I think you should really invest in this goal and go get a gait analysis done at a running shoe specialty store. They can kind of tell you if you pronate or, things like that. Maybe see if you need more stability in your shoe, or if you have a pretty good arch, and maybe you can run with less heel to toe drop. I've experimented with a lot of different shoes, Aaron, and I have no loyalty to any brand. There's certain brands that don't work for me and have kind of proven to me I probably won't try them again, but like the Ultra I run. I've also used the Hoka ones, and Sauconys are probably my favorite, although I haven't bought a pair for a while because I'm kind of in experimentation mode. But aside from investing in that, kind of getting the running shoe, a good pair of running shoes, get a good training plan. Hal Higdon's got a website where you can go. And I'm not a numbers guy. You're more of a numbers guy. I'm more regimented than I am. And I had to start off being regimented just to hold myself accountable and just kind of give myself a format to help build up my base, during my training, keep me on track to get to my goal. And that works really well. And if I ever get back into where I'm wanting to really, get a new personal best or something like that, I'll definitely be following a more regimented plan to do so. But I definitely think, especially for your first experiment, trying to get to your next distance, like a half marathon, from 5K to half marathon or half marathon to marathon, get, more of a formal plan in place. Hal Higdon's got a good website for that kind of thing. You probably have some resources for that as well. And try to follow it and be patient.
Definitely.
If, on Wednesday, you're supposed to run your 10-mile midweek, second longest run of the week, and Wednesday's been a shit storm at work and you're stressed, pardon my French again, but, the body really, it's amazing how stress at work can really affect your workout and vice versa. So if it works better for you on Thursday instead of Wednesday, it's okay. Do it Thursday, allow some deviation from that plan, but have a general guideline and try to follow it, pretty well. But, also don't beat yourself up if you got some kind of shin splint you think is coming on, maybe forego one of those runs that week to see what happens, because you don't want to get into this chronic, injury situation where you're going to actually prevent yourself from attaining your goal because you're being overly stubborn. So that's the hard thing, is to kind of discern what kind of pain is this. Is this one of those pains that it's going to be better for me to work through it, or is this one of these pains that I should probably lighten up here and kind of step back from the training a little bit to see what's going on with this? This might be a serious issue, And again, experience is going to teach you that. You're going to learn about your own pain threshold, and you're going to get to know your body on pain areas and things like that, and what might be a serious possible potential injury that you're exacerbating by continuing the training versus, hey, this is just something you got to gut through. You got to have some grit and get through it, and it'll pass.
Yeah. And I think most of the injuries that a lot of runners get is just doing a lot of running in too short a time, and not building up that distance. And it's something that I found, because I went from pretty much zero to training for a marathon. And in my first week, I was running 30 Ks, which is, I think,
18 miles. 18
how many miles that is. 18 miles. Yeah. And so I went from 0 to 18 miles in a week. And I can tell you what, there were a lot of weird pains going on.
Activating muscles you hadn't used before, like those weird stabilizers next to your calves. Yeah. You're like, oh, what's that muscle?
Yeah, and even just joints. I have a lot of trouble with joints, and the ketogenic diet helps with that, obviously. But there's my ankle and my knees, and so if there is someone out there who's just starting to train for a marathon, definitely ramping up the kilometers slowly is the best way to do it. And I think anywhere from like 16 weeks out, you should be starting to train. If it's less than that, if it's 12 weeks, if you've done a half marathon before, then definitely. But I would always recommend 16 weeks, because then you can get a good solid block of, 4-week intervals. And I try and do 3 weeks of pretty heavy training and then 1 week of recovery.
I saw that on your YouTube, actually,
Yeah, and is that something that you do, or you just sort of like?
Man, I'm kind of, I'm not there's very few similarities I have with Courtney DeWalter. Listen to her podcast with Joe Rogan because she's such a beast. She's such a badass. But one thing she said was, I just go out and run intuitively. Now, I don't go put on 150-mile weeks like her. I'm like a 25 to 35-mile week guy for the most part. But I often do that here as of late, the last few years, is I go out and I'm like, man, I need to get a 10-plus miler today. I go out, and if I feel like crap at mile 5, I'm like, man, I'll have to rethink that, and maybe, I need to just do my long run later. But a lot of times I go out, and I'm just like, I don't know what I'm going to run today. It might be an hour, but if I feel good, I'll probably push it to an hour and a half instead. So I kind of do a little bit of an intuitive training from that respect. I remember she said that, and I'm like, man, that rings so true with how I've been lately, and it's worked for me. I've got a base of 10 plus years of running consistently, so maybe I can BS my way around training a little bit more than another person. But my goals aren't to go out and run fast like they used to be on the road racing days. I like to push myself, but I'm not hyper focused on that watch, looking to make sure I'm below the 8-minute mark per mile like I was when I was trying to hit a certain finish time back in 2012. But yeah, that's just been kind of my approach lately, is just see how it feels, go out and run it and enjoy it. But another thing I would suggest is that, try to learn about running. The book Born to Run, I'll get back to that previous question yet. I haven't read that recently. I'm starting to reread it because I read it about 5 or 6 years ago. It's such a great book. What made you start running? What made you fall in love with running? And it's just, there's a lot of answers to that question, but I feel free, even on the road. I love the woods because I feel like I'm in touch, like there's a primal ancestral thing going on. It's kind of like being going through a carnivore week of just eating carnivore diet type keto, the same feel I get out in the woods, I feel like I'm in touch with the earth, and that's what I love about trail running, for example. It's exhilarating. But I love road running because I get out of my mind and I get to feel free, stress-free, and just taking on the challenge of the miles on the road. And sometimes the weather can be bad, and to push through that. But being light on your feet, and learn about running. There's a certain form to running, people have a certain form when they do a forearm or a backhand in tennis. The same thing applies to running. Back to shoes, this is touched on in the book Born to Run, which kind of got me into this, but heel striking is your enemy. Heel striking is putting the brakes on every single step. And the mechanics of running, you're not supposed to land on your heel. It's going to be bad for your joints. It's going to have a negative ripple effect throughout the rest of your body. And one way to test that theory out is to just take the shoes off and go run out on your front driveway. And you tell me how you like landing on your heels then. And when we were little kids running around without shoes, we weren't landing on our heels. And anytime we accidentally did, we're like, ow, So shoes have kind of changed the game.
Maybe start off on the grass.
And there's a certain, your hips, you're leaning forward. You're using gravity with running. You're not just straight up and down or leaning back. There's a slight lean. So go out and study a little bit about it. Go out on the interwebs and research, proper running form and stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that applies to the ketogenic diet as well. There's so much science out there, but you can go out and apply it effectively if you just know what you're doing, and you're just applying little bits at a time. So, thank you so much for talking to me today, Dave. It's been such an honor to interview someone who's done so much running.
Well, thank you, Aaron. I really appreciate getting to be on your show. I just love what you do out on social media, and this is so cool that you're doing the podcast. I can't wait to listen to all of the episodes you put out, man.
Well, I'm an ex-audio engineer, so I think it was about time.
Yeah.
So where can people find you on social media? What's your Instagram and YouTube handle?
One word: AntiGravityGains. It's just a dorky name I came up with. I'm on Instagram at AntiGravityGains, and on YouTube I have a channel that every now and then I upload to. I love video editing. It's not high on the priority list right now with the rest of my life, but things going on in my life. But yeah, at AntiGravityGains, and it's just about, gravity can either pull us and weigh us down and make us deteriorate, or we can engage in it and we can use it to our benefit and fight the effects that it has on us over time, and hopefully age at a little slower pace because of our athletic and active endeavors, and our way of eating.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And definitely go and check him out. Go out and you might see some monster orders on the Instagram stories as well. They're always fun to wake up to. But again, thank you so much, Dave. It's been such a pleasure. And, until next time.
I appreciate it, Aaron. I look forward to talking with you again. I look forward to watching your videos and listening to other guests on your podcast too, man.
For sure. Well, you've always been the first. So again, thanks. And we'll leave it at that. All right. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you loved this podcast, make sure you hit subscribe to be notified next week when the podcast arrives. If you could do one small act of kindness for today, I would greatly appreciate a review from you. It's really easy and it allows me to keep making podcasts just like this one every week just for you. Head on over to fatforweightloss.com.au/podcasts for the latest updates and all the show notes. Until next week.